We believe in one. Last week, it's Philip Ryken, who said this: wisdom is sweet like fragrant perfume, but it does not take much foolishness to turn things sour, because folly stinks. All it takes is one rash word, one rude remark, one hasty decision, one foolish pleasure, or one angry outburst to spoil. Apparently, I said something wrong. I was talking about the sin of David and Bathsheba and how it all started from the simple fact that he stayed home, right? The one little mistake, one little thing he did was he stayed back when his mighty men went out to battle, and he didn't go with them. And then I was talking about how one thing can lead to another until it ruins everything. But then I talked about Bathsheba bathing, I said, on the ceiling. So what I meant was roof, not ceiling. It wasn't like she was Spider-Woman, crawling on the ceiling. So yes, wisdom is better than folly, as we saw in the previous chapter, Ecclesiastes 9, but it only takes a little bit of folly to take a wise man or woman down. Folly has its dangers, and wisdom has its limits, because a little bit of folly can destroy a whole lot of wisdom. Then we looked at verse 2, which says, a wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. And he's talking about the heart. The heart. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right way. A fool does what he does because his heart is leaning in the wrong directions. The heart in Scripture is the core of our being. A wise heart has properly ordered affections. And then verse 3 says, even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he's a fool. The fool who's following the deceitfulness of his heart, rather than guarding his heart, rather than guiding his heart, keeping his heart, is clueless. He's deceived. He lacks sense. He tells everybody without saying it that he is a fool. By his bad decisions, by his bad choices, he's basically announcing to the world that he's a fool. So, with all that being said, let's everybody stand for the reading of our text from God's living, holy, inspired, infallible word. Ecclesiastes chapter 10. We're just going to read through the whole thing, starting in verse 1. Dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when a fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he's a fool. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I have seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones is hurt by them. He who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, but wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it's charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. The words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be, and who can tell him what will be after him. The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and your princes feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of the nobility, and your princes feast at the proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Through sloth the roof sinks in, and through indolence the house leaks. Bread is made for laughter, and wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. Even in your thoughts, do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich, for a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature tell the matter. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. This is a great chapter, but it's also a little difficult to understand when you just first read through it. I was going to try to go through it really quickly, but that's not going to happen. I don't want it to happen now. It's a great chapter. There's a lot of good gold in this chapter. Solomon is obviously going back into Proverbs mode here. He's just giving proverb after proverb. He's saying a bunch of things that can be kind of difficult to tie together and see the connections. Maybe he's just illustrating what he's been saying in the book, that why we need wisdom. He's writing why we need wisdom, and he's showing we need wisdom to understand the wisdom he's giving us. I found an outline of this chapter in one of my commentaries by David Hubbard and Lloyd Ogilvie, where they give an outline of the chapter that I really like. So I'm just going to borrow their outline, and we're going to go through it. So the first point is verses 1 through 3, and that's called folly, corrupt, and corrupting. That's what we covered last week. The second point in the outline is power, used and abused. That's verses 4 through 7. Next is work, careless and cautious. That's verses 8 through 11. Next one is words, graceful and calling, verses 12 through 15. And then finally, rulers, decadent and disciplined, verses 16 through 20. So rather than come up with my own outline, that one's too good to reinvent the wheel, so we're going to use that. So we looked at folly, corrupt and corrupting. We looked at power. We're going to look at power used and abused today, verses 4 through 7. Verse 4 says, if the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place, and princes walking on the ground like slaves. So this is talking about power, abused or used and abused. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. Remember, life is often unknowable, uncontrollable. It's a vaporous mist. We've seen that over and over in Ecclesiastes. We don't always have control of who has power over us, even, who rules over us. It might be a civil leader or a church leader or a boss or a husband or a parent. Wisdom tells us that if the anger of the ruler rises against you, the first wise response to an angry ruler is to not be rash in your reaction, right? Don't just leave. Don't just storm out. Keep calm and carry on. If you are in a subordinate position and someone over you is angry or maybe even abusing his authority, your first response should not be to just leave. Just quickly leave. This verse is emphasizing the importance and wisdom of remaining calm, not deserting your position when a ruler expresses anger. Remaining calm and showing deference, even when faced with someone above you's outbursts, is a wiser and more mature response than reacting with pride or reacting in just quick rebellion. Wisdom underscores the power of composure in calming a volatile situation. We see this in Proverbs as well. Proverbs 16:14. A king's wrath is a messenger of death, and a wise man will appease it. Proverbs 25:15. With patience, a ruler may be persuaded. With patience, a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue will break a bone. Now, David is a great example of this. King David is a great example. After he killed Goliath, King Saul hired him to do live music for the king's court, right? He killed Goliath and showed great bravery, and Saul, the king, had him come to play the harp. And then David started winning these battles and winning these, doing great things. And he started getting more and more popular with the people. Remember it got to the point where Saul heard the women singing, and they were singing. It was like the top 10 on the charts. The song they were singing. Saul killed his thousands, but David killed tens of thousands. And Saul didn't like that. He didn't like that. He So he started getting really jealous. More and more jealous. And eventually, it got to the point where he was playing the harp, and Saul, his boss, grabbed a spear and threw it at him, tried to kill him. And that was just the first time. He did it again. He did it twice, as far as we know, at least twice. He took a spear, tried to kill him. I mean, I've had jobs in the past, but I've never had my boss. I have a couple bad bosses, but I've never had one throw a spear at me. Anybody else? I mean, he didn't quit right then, the first time, right? But he did eventually leave. I mean, our text is not saying just take abuse, and keep on taking it. No, he's saying the wisdom says don't be rash. Don't just quickly leave. Don't just quickly run. When you're under authority, just stay calm. Keep calm. It might pass. Anyways, then the story, you know the story about what happened. Finally, David left. He's out, and Saul's chasing after him. He brings 3,000 guys with him, and David's in this cave. You guys know the story about when Saul is trying to find David to kill him, and it turns out David and his men were in this cave that Saul ends up in. I'm just going to read the story. I love this story because there's so much in it that illustrates what our text says. So 1 Samuel 24, starting in verse 1, it says, when Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the Wild Goats Rocks. Sounds like a restaurant. Wild Goats Rocks. Or a band, I don't know. Then it says, and he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. And the men of David said to him, here is the day in which Yahweh said to you, behold, I will give your enemy into your hands, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you. Then David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. So they're telling him, this is your chance, kill him. But he comes in like a ninja, and he cuts off a piece of his robe, stealthily. And afterward, David's heart struck him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. So his men were telling him to kill him. He cuts the corner of his robe off, and then David feels bad, right? He feels bad about what he did. So he said, continues, verse 6, he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed. So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. Afterward, David also arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, my Lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. He bows and pays homage to Saul after Saul's been trying to kill him. And David said to Saul, why do you listen to the words of men who say, behold, David seeks your harm. Behold, this day your eyes have seen how Yahweh gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed, Yahweh's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May Yahweh judge between me and you. May Yahweh avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. Our text says, if the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. I think the story of David is a huge example of that. Solomon learned this from his dad, who was David. Remember, Solomon was born in Jerusalem. He was the second-born child of David and his wife Bathsheba, the widow of Uriah the Hittite. Just think of this in terms of just having a boss who loses his cool. If your first reaction is to hand in your resignation, that's obviously not wise, right? If anything, you're going to lose your job, you're going to lose your income because you just couldn't stand a little bit of anger from above. It's foolishness to respond to foolish anger with foolish anger. Proverbs 15, 1 and 2 says, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise commends knowledge, but the mouths of fools pour out folly." So in verses 1 through 3, we saw the difference between wisdom and folly. We saw the folly is both corrupt and corrupting. Now in verse 4, we are seeing how to deal with the folly of those who are over us, who are above us, who are in authority over us. We see what to do when power is used and abused. And then we go on in verse 5. Verse 5 says, "There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I have seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves." So in verse 5, we see that once again, life under the sun is unknowable, it's uncontrollable. We are not always in control of those who rule over us. He says, this is an evil that I've seen under the sun in life. This is a reality. This is what happens, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. There's an evil that I've seen, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. The word error implies a sin of negligence rather than deliberate act of malice. So sometimes rulers make mistakes. This is going to happen. The point is that even with those in positions of power are capable of making mistakes that have maybe potentially significant consequences. And then verse 6 says, foolishness, is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I don't know if you guys watched the debate this past week, but between the presidential, to illustrate this, take this verse. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. We saw a politician debating a businessman. In our day, we can see how folly is set in many high places. There's many fools in charge of things. Many fools in high places. Because life is messy and out of our control, we see the rich sit in a low place. I don't think the rich here are being condemned. I think what Solomon is saying is that those who are successful in life are not always those who are in control. They're not always those who are in charge. When in fact, perhaps those who can run a successful business, those who can gain wealth, might be better suited to run a government because they can run a business. Verse 6 implies a world turned upside down, where incompetence or foolishness, folly, occupies positions of authority, exalted places, while those who are wealthy, the rich, are relegated to positions of lower status or lowly places. And I think this just illustrates his earlier point that even a small amount of folly can outweigh wisdom and honor. We see here the instability of earthly hierarchies and the reality that wisdom and ability do not always govern. I like what Philip Ryken, how he explains it. He said, once again, the preacher is reporting what he sees. He's reporting what he has seen. This time he offers a notable example of what he was talking about in verse 1, when he said that a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. In other words, in the words of Martin Luther, so this is Ryken quoting Martin Luther, just as dead flies ruin the best of ointments, so it happens to the best of counsel in the state, in the Senate, or in war. Along comes some wicked rascal and ruins everything. And then Ryken continues. That was Luther. And he says, unfortunately, there are many foolish people in government. As foolish as they are, they nonetheless manage to work their way into positions of political leadership. Some are completely incompetent. Others use their positions for personal advantage. They are more interested in status than service. By the time their folly is exposed, it's too late. The damage has been done. Afterward, people wonder how they ever managed to get put in charge. That's Riken. I think we can all relate to this, right? I think we can relate to this. In our day, there are many fools making the rules. Folly is set in many high places. And then Riken continues. He says, when the wrong people get into power, everything gets turned upside down. Preacher says in verse 5 that errors in leadership produce evil in society. Then he describes some of the bad things that happen. The rich sit in a low place. In a different context, this reversal might indicate the triumph of justice as the filthy rich finally get put in their place. But here it means that people with financial resources do not have the power to use them for the public good. Then he says, verse 7 sounds like something out of Mark Twain's famous novel, The Prince and the Pauper, in which two men with similar looks but different social positions switch places. In biblical times, horses were strongly associated with power, wealth, and royal authority. Slaves generally did not ride on horseback, but walked in front of or behind their masters. But when folly sits on the throne, everything is topsy-turvy. Slaves ride while princes walk. That's similar. I think this is nothing new under the sun. We can all relate to this. When folly reigns, everything gets topsy-turvy. He says, I've seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. As we have seen over and over in Ecclesiastes, things are outside of our control. Wisdom and status are not always aligned in a fallen world, and Solomon is pointing out his observation about life's unpredictability and the seeming randomness of things. How we don't have control, that things happen, people rule over us, people above you might have outbursts of anger. Sometimes slaves ride on horses and princes will walk on the ground like slaves. Wise men do not always rule. Life is not always going the way you think it should. Does anybody relate to that? How life doesn't always go the way you think it should? But God is God. And we've seen that over and over. God is sovereign. So things are going like they should. It's just not the way we think it should. God knows what he's doing. As a nation, when we see those two guys debating over who's going to be the next president, as a nation, we deserve worse than both of them combined. God is God, we're not. Our God reigns. Our God reigns. He's sovereign, and he's good. Sometimes the wisest thing to do when everything seems out of control and we feel like victims is just to keep calm. Keep calm and carry on. We must live by faith. Live by faith. Walter Kaiser says this: the arbitrariness of despotism is indicated by the frequent reversal of positions among the citizenry. In a culture in which only dignitaries were allowed the privilege of riding, there was great social upheaval, as suggested by the complete reversal of normal roles. Servants were riding horses, while princes walked like menials at their side. Many have longed to know why such things are allowed by God to happen. If only. But that is one part of God's plan that he has not been pleased to reveal to us in detail. The reality of such arbitrariness is freely granted by the text, but the text also warns us against permitting it to become a roadblock to joyful and active involvement in life. Remember, the title of this series is A Control Freak's Guide to Joy. Just because we don't have control does not mean we cannot have joy. We may not be in control, but we can enjoy the ride. Philippians 4:4-7 says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Are you having anxiety about the uncontrollableness of life? Are you stressed about things being out of your control? He says, don't be anxious about anything. Just let your prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Pray. Pray. And the peace of God, the kind of peace that passes all understanding, will guard your heart. We're talking about the heart, how it leans to the right or to the left. You want to guard your heart. You want to guard your heart? Pray. And let the peace of God just keep your mind on him. Then down verse 11 of Philippians 4, it says, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am in to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Next week, we'll get to the last 3 points of the outline. First, we see folly, corrupt and corrupting. Second is power, used and abused. Next, we'll see work, careless and cautious. Words, graceful and calling. And rulers, decadent and disciplined. Now to the King, eternal, immortal, invisible, to God, who alone is wise, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen. Please stand. Let's pray together.